yeah, so an unfortunate set of circumstances, but yeah. In any case, welcome to those on the YouTube recording, by the way. Um, yeah. Beyond that, wanted to discuss some happenings going on. This one actually related to the gaming world. Was been looking through a lot of the recommended videos, and for the record, I have not been an Xbox person in quite some time. Like did not have the original Xbox when it was running. My family had um, actually multiple GameCubes. Not sure why, but yeah, there was two GameCubes and a PlayStation 2. And then eventually a PlayStation 2 Slim, but we kept the older one because we just used it as a default DVD player, but just never played games on it, and it moved downstairs. Um, yeah, and for the record, it was not one family at the time. It was literally myself and my cousin's family. So it was also kind of a necessity because there were four kids in the room and a constant scheduling hiccup trying to get that thing to work. Where you would have have a family member on basically each system for a period of time, either playing games or watching DVDs with the PlayStation 2. And eventually, yeah, but we didn't have no Xbox in that rotation. And then we got to the 360 generation. We did have Xboxes. In fact, we had repeated Xbox. We ended up needing to have a backup 360 that never actually got plugged in until the other one red ringed, because they were constantly getting red ringed. So we had two where one basically served as a backup when we have to send the other one out. So yeah, we had quite the process there for a while. But the 360 was the only time we really got big into Xbox. There was a point where I had an Xbox One at the very end of its cycle because someone was selling theirs used for barely over $100, and there was like two games I think I wanted to play from the generation. I think I was trying to do NHL hockey at the time, as well as I don't even remember what the other one was, but yeah, I was going through all of that and need either a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox, or we called it, was the X-Bone because XB won. But yeah, we got that thing. At this point, I was living on my own. I had already moved out, so I ended up going with the heavy discounted one since my brother already had the PS4 and he was still living with the family. But I didn't want to have to drive over there for all of that. So, worked with the low-end model of the Xbox One for a little while. Haven't done anything with the series. Haven't really felt a need to, though I did consider getting a Series S strictly for dev mode because I could have uploaded emulators. This was before I had this PC. Now that I have that, there's no point. There is absolutely no point in getting an Xbox for the sake of dev mode. But I had even considered it because the one time I did have an original Xbox, it was at a retro game store. They had been outfitting them with emulators, which is how I got to play a lot of games for the first time from the 8-bit era, since I actually started gaming in 96. My first system was the second model of the Super Nintendo, at a point when the console was already had already been replaced by the N64, but there was enough market share in it that they still want to keep the thing going, so they got the model for cheap. I really like that model too. I actually tracked one down, and if I get the urge, I still pull it out, but not super often. Most of the games I played at that time were sports games. Still are, actually. My most fond memories from the Super Nintendo era were Madden 97, NHL 95, and then 98, NBA Live 95. The only first-party Nintendo game I think I ever played was Super Punch-Out, at least in that current time frame. Ended up doing a lot of the Super Nintendo games after the fact, either their versions that came up on the Game Boy Advance or as they came through on the Virtual Console. But the Xbox One, or not the original Xbox with the emulators, is how I was able to play and get through the first 3 Zeldas. So, yeah, Zelda 1, Zelda 2, and Link to the Past all pretty much got taken care of in that way. And some of the old Mario games that showed up when they were remade, was able to do that. But yeah, I was just gonna give my history there with the Xbox. Not super invested in getting back into it. At this point, the Xbox is basically just, with the way they conduct themselves, they've kind of taken away their point. So this is my take on the whole situation. Because obviously, making a console more expensive that nobody is buying in the first place is not going to lead to business success. And obviously, doubling or nearly doubling the price of your streaming service is not going to lead to success. Especially not when basically you've kind of taken away the actual advantage of it, because the entire idea was it was about 4 months worth. Would be a $60 expenditure. So you effectively, for the cost of 3 games, had a year of online play and all of this, and that was a great deal. But then, if you double it, what you basically get is, now it's 2 months for that time frame. And so now you basically are spending 6 games a year, and the question becomes, realistically, are you actually going to be buying that many games? Realistically, how much are you going to be committed to a bunch of games? Obviously, I'm cycling through a bunch of things that I've got in my queue that I've built up, but I got a lot of those at heavy discounts, and they're also accrued over about a decade. And even then, you can see I've not gotten super deep into a lot of them. It's just a few playthroughs at a time, because I don't have that much of a schedule. The entire reason I got into the VTubing thing is because otherwise I was not going to really plan out times for gaming. So at least this way, once I start really in November getting on a firm 4 to 5 day schedule, I will actually have a set time frame of gaming of, maybe 8 hours a week, where I can really make a dent in a couple of games and start having a shot at beating some of these things and moving on and actually running through this queue a little bit. But for a lot of people, they think of that it would just be easier to own the games and do it at my leisure rather than have to continue to subscribe to a service and hope that they stay on there. So you've taken away that entire deal. But I think, truthfully, the Xbox management and the people at Microsoft know this is a problem, but they're in a position where they've kind of forced their own hand. I'm just taking a bit of tea there. And what I mean by that is, think of it like this. For a long time, nobody really could figure out how Xbox was making money with the Game Pass and Live system, because even at its most expensive, you were only getting a frame of... Just a sec. At its peak, you were only getting about $20 from people, and you had to split it up among all of the games they were playing. So you weren't getting that many dollars. And that had to, considering how much it costs to actually run the servers and like maintain like everything, you probably were losing money on a lot of that exchange. Additionally, you sell your consoles at a loss, and with the assumption that they will buy games for it that you will then be able to make stuff back on. As a matter of fact, they've been buying out a bunch of studios because if they own the studios that are making the games, they don't have to share that revenue. So it's a bigger chunk that they can make more profit on the software side. But if you're doing Game Pass for like $17 a month, then what is the incentive to buying the physical games? You've basically destroyed both of your main revenue streams because the console's not making money, nobody's buying the games because they have the Game Pass, and the Game Pass doesn't make money because it has to be split among a bunch of people. So at a certain point, you find yourself asking, when does the money start getting made? And obviously they make plenty off the software still because they've split it up across other platforms. Like all the Microsoft games, their second-party games and all of that, and the times where they release for the Switch or for the PlayStation or for the PC, those are making money as well. And that's where they're getting their gaming revenue back. But at the same time, if you're going to do that anyway, it's also taking away from any need to go get an Xbox, because why would you need an Xbox if you can just play it on PC? Why would you get an Xbox if you can play most of the games on Steam Deck, or with the specific modes like being able to work around? If you get a few of the games on PlayStation or Switch, also kind of takes it away. So you basically have this very narrow group that's buying specifically because they want to be able to play a couple of specific Xbox games on the Xbox, and they want to also physically have them. Even though all the stuff is not on the disc, it's just triggering the download, and part of the game is on the disc. Viewed through this way, you can see why there's not a giant market for this thing, and why it's lagging so far behind the PlayStation 5 right now. And they've probably become aware that they basically rendered themselves obsolete because there is no actual justifiable reason to purchase an Xbox. So what they're doing now is an act of desperation where they're raising the price of the Xbox, not even necessarily because of the tariffs, I don't think, because honestly, the amount of sales they have, I can't imagine they don't have a fairly sizable backlog that are already made. So, and they're probably selling even fewer with the new pricing. But they're doing it because now they might actually be able to make a couple bucks on this thing, or they're still taking a loss, but now it's a smaller loss. Now it's negligible, probably. And meanwhile, they're doubling the price of Game Pass almost because they want to be able to start pulling in some dollars on it. I believe what was happening, and this might be conspiratorial, so take this with a grain of salt. It's pure speculation. Could mean nothing. My belief is that their plan was always to do this. Their plan had been, eventually, all of this pro-consumer stuff they had been doing, which actually was good, would eventually drive Sony to scale back their PlayStation, making them the dominant console. And once they had that control, they could actually start spiking the pricing because they wouldn't have any real competition. It would just basically be the Nintendo Switch as an active opponent, and they're not actively seeking power. Like, they're not seeking, let me rephrase. They want power. but they do not seek it through having the most powerful console anymore. They stopped doing that with the GameCube. And so, what I'm taking from that is that had been the idea. This was always going to happen. But what changed is that no one actually bought in enough to let them enact this plan. So now they're doing it basically to save themselves. They've derailed themselves so hard that this move has to be taken just to stop the bleeding, as it were. And there is a special kind of like embarrassment that comes from you have to start using your finishing blow just to try to get back into neutral. Like, anyone who's like been through heck, you see me in these Sonic races, you get derailed completely, and then you're just using all your power-ups to get back into the middle of the pack. That's kind of where Xbox is, I think. Now, they do have a console prepared. I don't think it's going to do particularly well because it's going to be the next generation console. What are you going to do? Sell it cheaper than what you're selling this thing? So they've kind of already like wrecked themselves on that front. Their best hope, I think, is going to be this joint effort they're doing with either Acer or Asus, one of the two companies, where they're going to be an Xbox branded handheld. And this might actually be their way to go because they're not having to spend any R&D on it. They do have the dev kit because it's through them, so they'll optimize their games for it. But I think that's their play. If you can get by on an Xbox branded console that you don't actually have to develop, they might just stop off completely. Their home console will effectively be replaced by a gaming PC. Like, they'll just make an Xbox branded gaming PC finally, which is what I figured Microsoft was eventually going to do anyway. And that's just going to be what the Xbox kind of is at that point. And then you'll have the handheld version, which will actually be their big thing. What their best hope is that an Xbox branded handheld actually competes with and maybe tops the Steam Deck. And then it becomes like the dominant power handheld. And then what you maybe will see is Nintendo, rather than maintaining the Switch as their dominant console all around, give the Switch capability of swapping onto the home, but it's ultimately a handheld. And then they're going to release a proper full-fledged home console again without the switching ability. And that one will actually compete on power with Sony. Now that's going to depend on how bad Nintendo wants to control the space. Do they want to try to fight a two-front battle again, where they would deal with Microsoft on one side and Sony on the other? It's possible. And I think the Nintendo fanboys are committed enough that they would totally buy both. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting stretch there, because I do think we are seeing an era where Microsoft might be realizing they aren't long for this world on the console space. Their only markets they've really penetrated were the English-speaking ones, and even there, they're basically fighting to a draw at best most times. Like the 360 won in the USA and the UK, but Sony wins basically everywhere else, and Sony has basically won, even if it was by a small margin, even stateside in the last two generations. So I do get concerned about Sony operating alone in the super strong console battle. And I hope that either Nintendo will step up to them, Microsoft fixes themselves, or maybe another group comes in. Maybe Sega realizes they have a lot of games that are selling really well that people are committed to, and maybe it's time to R&D another console. I don't think they'll do that. I think much like Microsoft is going to realize with all these studios they bought, it's probably more lucrative to just produce the games and just have the entirety of console production done by just Sony and Nintendo. But we will see how that goes. I've talked quite a bit on this now. It was like a 10 minutes yap fest in general. Actually, no, that went almost 20. So with that said, I am going to stop yammering on that, and we're gonna play a couple of Grand Prix here to wrap up this one. So I'm gonna deactivate the recording here for a moment on YouTube. I will see you all in a bit. So I'll give you a moment there.